Okay, so I was going to go ahead and get started with Chapter 1, and I wanted to show you what I meant by downloading the PowerPoints and being able to watch them in slideshow mode. If you look at them in this preview, the hyperlinks won't be activated. So go ahead and click on the Download Chapter 1, and it'll store it in your Downloads file folders for you. I'm in Chrome, so it makes this little extra thing to click on down there. But when you launch the PowerPoint, I'm going to go ahead and hit Enable Editing just so that I'll be able to, sometimes I have videos embedded that won't work if you don't have that set up. And this little symbol down here at the bottom runs it in slideshow. There's other ways you can enter slideshow also. Okay, so let's just go ahead and get started with Chapter 1. And Chapter 1 is kind of a little defensive, so bear with me. I didn't write the textbook. I'm accompanying it with my lecture. One of the things that we notice in psychology that's a little bit frustrating is that for most people, the most famous psychologist that anybody can think of is Freud. And in fact, this list that you're seeing right here is the top 20 psychologists of the 20th century. And this list was compiled by asking department chairs to name who they thought was the most famous or most important, most influential psychologist of the 20th century. It was also compiled by taking into account how many publications a psychologist had, how many times their publications were cited by other psychologists, whether their name has become what's called an eponym, which is where their name has become a thing, like a Skinner box or Pavlovian conditioning, which it's funny I said Pavlov because he's not on the list. Freudian slip, things like that. Piagetian conservation task. So with all of these factors put together, this list was compiled, and we see Skinner at the top and a bunch of people that you probably have never heard of populating most of it, and Freud is in the third position. It's kind of frustrating that Freud is the most known by lay people. When I teach this class in person, I pass out little slips of paper and I ask students to write a famous psychologist from history, the most famous psychologist they can think of from history, on one slip of paper. And then on the other slip of paper, they're supposed to write a modern famous psychologist. And every quarter, it doesn't matter, at least 75% of the slips of famous psychologists say Freud on them. And then on the current psychologists, almost all of them are blank, with the occasional Dr. Phil or the name of somebody who they've had a class from, or somebody who they have seen on TV for some purpose, something like that, something very obscure. So it really makes you wonder, and you know, when I teach this class, it's pretty much all psych majors. I mean, these are people who are like you probably, planning to go on and get their upper division bachelor's degree in psychology. Some of you are probably taking this as a prerequisite to get into a master's program in psychology. And so it's really disconcerting to see how many people who plan on being psychology students will list Freud as number one. Why is it so disconcerting? Well, he's a pretty bad example of a psychologist. Now, am I in some kind of like, you know, Freudian defense mechanism kind of, I just want to overcompensate and act like I hate him? No, not true. The main reason why he's a bad example of a psychologist is that he's not a psychologist. I think that's a pretty bad that's a pretty bad example of a psychologist when you aren't even a psychologist. The reason why he's not a psychologist, a lot of you guys might say, well, didn't he found it? Well, no, he didn't. He was a medical doctor, and really what he founded was the field of psychiatry. What makes him not a psychologist is that he never did any kind of controlled experiments. He never really did any kind of like quantifiable data collection of any sort. All he did was case studies. He never did, in fact, any direct observations. When his patients would tell him something, he would just sort of take it as, you know, true. I don't know if true's right because he thought they were oftentimes defending themselves and making things up, but he never went to their homes and observed them interacting with their family. I mean, you know what I mean? He never did anything quantifiable and concrete. Another issue with Freud is that he's got this grand theory that covers all these things. I mean, you got to give the man credit for all the aspects of human behavior that he attributed to unconscious motivations and things like that, and parenting and things. But he really had very little data to back it up. He had case studies and his own inferences to back up his theory. You know, if you look at it, through the lens of science, you have to come to the conclusion Freud's really a philosopher. I mean, he makes assertions, uses his logic to back up those assertions, and doesn't rely on data to determine the conclusions that he's going to draw. So it brings up the question then, why do we talk about Freud so much? Why does everybody know his name? I mean, even if those of you who are international students can attest to this, you knew who Freud was before you knew anything else about psychology, and so it's not just an American thing. And of course, Freud's not even American. So, but I mean, all around the world, everybody knows who Freud is, and he's so closely tied in our minds with psychology, unfortunately. But humanities love Freud. I mean, even as psychology lost its interest in Freudian concepts, the humanities like English and philosophy and things really continued to like Freud. Why? Well, who doesn't love the idea that your dreams might mean something, right? It's a beautiful idea that your dreams are going to reveal to you who you really are. Like Mr. Scrooge, who had this dream that needs to possibly be analyzed, right? It doesn't take a Freudian analyst to figure out what Scrooge's dream was about. But that idea that we have some kind of unconscious that could be harboring secrets from us and our dreams might reveal them, that is really tantalizing, isn't it? Slips of the tongue. This guy's a speaker at the Big is Beautiful conference, and he says, wow, heavy turnout. This is why you should always stick to the script. Slips of the tongue, Freudian slips, right? Really interesting. We like to believe that even when it comes out garbled, it's what you really meant to say. So what do we mean by it's what you really meant? It's what your unconscious meant to say. Oh yeah, that's good stuff, right? So when somebody innocently inverts two words and makes inadvertently a goofy sentence out of it, it really means something, or he just had, a little cognitive competition. Well, it's more tantalizing for it to really mean something, right? Oh, for all of us who have not had children yet, childhood shaping by bad parents is a very attractive concept, isn't it? Us having been messed up by our parents, very attractive. Now, for those of us who have children, I have two. I have a 19-year-old and a 22-year-old. I would like to contest this theory and say, your parents did the best they could. That's what I'm going to say. Because even with all my psychology training, I'm pretty sure I still messed up my kids. Oh, you got to love this one because you've got another Freudian concept, the Oedipus conflict being made fun of with Mr. Oedipus. I really love my mom. So cute. Anyway. Now this one is, this comes from one of Freud's followers, Carl Jung. And Carl Jung asserted that we carry around in our collective unconscious, which is something different than Freud had offered. Freud said we have a personal unconscious. Jung said, yeah, we have that, but we also have a collective unconscious, and that we carry around in that collective unconscious archetypes about things like Superman, or what it means to be a mom, or fear of death being brought upon us by floods and things like that. That makes for great plots in movies and stories, doesn't it? Very attractive. How about complexes? An inferiority complex? Is that the best problem you can come up with? Complexes, inferiority being the one that you're probably the most familiar with, these kinds of complexes are thought to be, according to Alfred Adler, another follower of Freud, are thought to be, a sign that you internalized stuff when you were little that now it is causing you to behave in a less than advantageous way as an adult. Well, that's awesome for plot lines in books and movies and stuff like that, because you could say that the person has a Napoleonic complex. He's trying to show how powerful he is, right? This classic overcompensation. And then, of course, let's not forget the thing that Freud's the most famous for, which is sex. That makes him very attractive to anybody who's going to be writing or doing anything creative. Sex is a great topic for that. So that's why the humanities really like Freud and his followers. You know, these theories have provided all sorts of fodder for books and TVs and TV shows and movies and so on that are awesome, fun, great things, but are not necessarily supported by the data. All right, I'm going to wrap up this lecture with a little litany of what's the difference between science and philosophy, because what we're really talking about here, I kind of tried to call Freud a philosopher, and what I'm really trying to show is how science allows us to answer questions in ways that philosophy can't. Okay, now these are some videos that you may want to watch because I won't blow it for you, but you're going to want to watch these videos. If you come into and watch this as a slideshow, you'll see this is a hyperlink. And in class, what I like to ask students to do, and you can do this mentally and then go watch the video, and then you can come back to this video if you want, but predict how many pennies this kid is going to be able to drop into this completely full of water glass. This glass, when he fills up the glass, it's so full that it actually drips over a little bit, and then he starts dropping pennies in. How many pennies do you think that this person is going to be able to drop into this glass of water? Make your prediction and write it down so that you hold yourself accountable. Make your prediction and then watch the video and then come back to me, and what you'll find is our logic is not necessarily our best friend when trying to understand how the world works. Science tells us, let's go collect the data. Philosophy says, let's just reason it out. Let's use our logic. There's another example of science versus philosophy. And again, I want you to make your prediction before you watch the video, okay? The setup on the next video, and again, see if you hover over it, it's a hyperlink. The next video shows a guy spread out a piece of newspaper on top of a ruler. I've done it with a paint stick myself, and I've also done it with a ruler. So you lay down a sheet of paper, and he actually uses an even smaller sheet of newspaper. Smears it down, flattens it out on top of the ruler. And then he takes his fist and he whacks that ruler. Now the question is, what's going to happen to the paper? And what I like to give my students in class is a multiple choice question. Do you think it'll lift the paper off the table? Will it tear the paper? Will it break the ruler? What do you think will happen? So make your prediction and then go watch the video and come on back. My last example is also a video, and this is one where the guy's he has two balloons suspended from the ceiling, and then he uses a blow dryer to blow air between the two balloons. And our job is to predict what's going to happen to those two balloons when the air hits it. So the two balloons are hanging straight down, and then he aims the blow dryer so that the air is going right between the two balloons. And again, I'll give you a multiple choice question. And again, if you hover over it, you'll see that it becomes a hyperlink. Your three choices are: the balloons will blow away from each other, they will blow forward away from the blow dryer but in the same pathway as each other, or they'll blow toward each other. Okay, so watch the video and then come on back. Okay, so I'm assuming you all did like I said, and you actually watched the videos and got your mind blown, unless you've had physics, in which case you're like, duh, I knew that. Those of us who are psych majors oftentimes haven't had physics, so it blows our minds when we see physics in action. Science argues that we should follow empiricism, where we need to rely on direct observation of things in order to answer the questions. You'll notice I'm still not blowing it for you what the balloons and stuff did, because in case you didn't really go watch it, I want you to go watch it. So rely on direct observation. We don't just use our logic, use our rationale. We go ahead and we collect some data. Now, systematic empiricism is where we generate a theory first and let that theory drive our hypothesis development, which then we test using data collection. So systematic empiricism is when you have theory-driven hypothesis testing. So the difference between empiricism and systematic empiricism is that we stick our necks out a little bit in systematic empiricism and we make a prediction ahead of time, like I asked you to do before you watched the videos. I told you to make a prediction, write it down, and then see whether the data supported your prediction. That's systematic empiricism. All right. Now, another difference between science and philosophy. Science is publicly verifiable. In philosophy, you're using your logic, what's going on inside your head. Anybody who's taken philosophy knows that to try and take that thing that's going on inside the philosopher's head and convey it to someone else takes a lot of words, takes a lot of explaining, takes a lot of examples. And the person who's reading it or hearing the speech can never directly observe the source of this logic because it happened inside the philosopher's head, right? With science, the data is publicly verifiable, and the results, the analysis is publicly verifiable. So what do we mean by publicly verifiable? Well, for one thing, it means that other people could replicate our studies. We call that replicable. Other people could read our report or hear our talk at a conference and then go back and try and collect the data themselves and see if they get the same outcome. If they do, then it provides further support for our interpretation. If they don't get the same result, then it throws into question our interpretation. Now you'll notice that I've got some examples of just some papers that have the word replication in it. You'll notice when you're looking through the literature for your APA paper that there are a lot of studies that have replication study, a replication study, an extension and replication study. So you'll see that a lot in titles where people are replicating what other people have done. And it's important information to find out if other researchers could come to the same conclusion or not. Kind of leads directly into the next issue, which is that our scientific findings are criticizable. We put our findings up for peer review, either at a conference where other people can ask us questions and challenge our interpretations face to face, and they do. It's very nerve-wracking to be presenting something at a conference. Or if you try to publish it, it goes through a peer review process. Usually the peer review process at a journal will be blind. And I put blind in quotations because what we mean by that is the people who are reviewing your paper aren't supposed to know it was yours. They're supposed to get the paper without your name or any kind of identifying pieces of information. So I put usually blind in quotations because it's supposed to be blind. But I wanted to tell you a little bit about a study where they actually tested whether peer review is a blind process or not. They took a group of 12 previously published studies that they found in the literature, and they resubmitted those exact same studies to the exact same journals where they'd already been published before. But now on their manuscript, they changed the name from a famous author to, just a made-up name, somebody who's unknown. And then instead of being the original affiliation, University of Hartford, now it says, Pacific Coast Research Center or something like that, something lower status. What's interesting, first off, is that only 8%, that means 1 out of the 12 resubmits, was recognized as a resubmission. That's horrifying because that kind of implies that the peer reviewers don't even read the journal that they're peer reviewing for because they should have recognized that they'd seen that article before with somebody else's name on it. That's scary. The others, one got detected as a resubmit, 1 got recommended for publication, and all the rest got rejected. That's kind of shocking. That implies that the original success in getting those papers published had been tied to the name or affiliation of the author that originally submitted it, at least in part, that it wasn't really a blind review. So that's kind of frustrating. I still like to believe that the readers don't know who it is. I really do. The other thing about the peer review process is that once a paper is published, people read those papers and then can make comments directly to the author or directly to the journal and start a conversation about that. So peers let other people know what they think about what they've read. And then the other thing about publicly verifiable data is that the results are extendable. You'll notice that final journal article that I showed you said an extension and replication study. Extendable means that you might be able to extend this out beyond just the types of people who were participants in the original study, or that you might be able to extend it outside of a lab situation and put it out into the real world, or that you might be able to extend it from this set of materials that the original researcher used to a different set of materials that the new researcher is interested in. So that's what we mean, and that's the thing, that extendable part is what makes science move forward in little baby steps. So we keep moving forward just a little bit beyond what the previous researchers have found. Okay, so that's science versus philosophy. Let's go ahead and take a little break in talking now, and I'll start another lecture with a new topic. This empirically solvable problems will be our next topic.